It had been raining since morning. A fine, persistent drizzle tapped against umbrellas, bus windows, and the hood of Ellie's coat as she walked down a narrow street, carrying a bag in one hand. Today she had left the orphanage behind, stepping into a new life, though not without fear. Behind her were the stern caregivers, creaky beds, constant quarrels, and the rare moments of silence when she would imagine having a family. Now she was 18. The state had issued her a modest allowance, a spot in a dormitory, and a brief good luck. Ellie didn't complain. She had long learned to rely only on herself. But the cold autumn air and the uncertainty of what lay ahead weighed heavier than the bag she carried. Crossing the street, she glanced at a cafe window where two people were laughing, their arms around each other at a table. Ellie turned away. She had never experienced anything like that. And who would want to be with a girl with no past and no one behind her? The dormitory greeted her with peeling walls, damp air, and dim hallway lights. Her room, 6 square meters with a metal bed and a wobbly wardrobe. Ellie sat on the edge of the mattress, looking out the window. Outside, the same drizzle, like time had frozen. She spent the entire day there, sorting through her documents, trying to plan how to apply to college and find a part-time job. In the evening, when her stomach reminded her it was empty, Ellie threw on her coat and went to the nearest shop. She returned with a bag of instant noodles and tea, climbing the stairs to her building. And that's when she noticed something. At the entrance, two tenants were huddled by the radiator, a woman in a bathrobe and a guy wearing headphones. Between them, pressed against the wall, sat an old woman. Wrapped in a threadbare coat, her hands trembling, she tried to say something, but her voice was drowned by angry voices. "She keeps showing up. This isn't a shelter," the woman snapped. "I already called the police," the guy added. "It's like she's glued to that radiator." "Maybe she's just cold," Ellie muttered, stepping closer. The old woman looked up. There was something striking in her eyes. Not fear, not shame, but a quiet, weathered sorrow. Ellie suddenly imagined herself in the old woman's place, cold, alone, no one to turn to. "She's not making noise. She's not hurting anyone," Ellie said, stepping between the residents and the old woman. "Let her rest here for a while. What's the harm?" The woman huffed but backed off. The guy shrugged and walked away. Silence settled over the hallway. Ellie crouched next to the old woman. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. "What's your name?" "Margaret," the woman whispered. "I'm Ellie," she replied, holding out her hand. "Come up to my room. At least have some tea and warm up. I can't just leave you here." The old woman looked at her with surprise, like she couldn't believe someone could offer help so simply. Ellie didn't know exactly why she was doing this. Something had tugged inside her. And maybe for the first time in a long while, she didn't just want to receive warmth. She wanted to give it. The room was cold. Ellie turned on the desk lamp. Its dim light made the gray walls feel slightly warmer. The old woman sat on the bed without removing her coat, hands neatly folded in her lap, as if afraid to disturb the fragile order of this tiny world. Ellie boiled water in her electric kettle and opened a packet of instant noodles. A poor meal, not much, but enough for two. She placed a cup of hot tea in front of Margaret and sat across from her. "Sorry, it's still a bit like a train station here. I just moved in yesterday," she said with a sheepish smile. "But the tea is hot and the noodles are edible, I promise." Margaret looked at the mug hesitantly, like it was a rare gift. Her trembling fingers wrapped around it, and she took a small sip. Something flickered in her eyes. Maybe gratitude, maybe a memory. "Thank you, dear," she whispered. "People rarely offer a helping hand these days. Everyone's always rushing, looking the other way." Ellie nodded silently. She understood that world. One where you're invisible, where even a glance in your direction feels like charity. "Have you been like this for long?" she asked carefully. The old woman was quiet for a moment, deciding whether or not to answer. "A few years. After my son died," her voice trembled. "We had disagreements. He got married, moved away. We argued, foolishly, as people do. Then he was gone. No grandchildren. No other family. Just me." At first I managed, lived on my pension. Then the debts came. They took my apartment. That's how I ended up on the street. She spoke plainly, almost emotionlessly, as if everything had already been lived through and burned out. Ellie listened, her hands clenched in her lap. Her heart ached. That same ache she remembered when younger children cried quietly in the orphanage at night. The loneliness that hides in the simplest stories. "I'm sorry," Ellie whispered. "I know what it's like, being alone. I grew up in an orphanage. I don't remember my parents. Sometimes I dreamed that my mother was nearby singing to me. But when I woke up, just silence." Margaret lifted her gaze, a long, thoughtful look filled with pain, compassion, and something maternal. She reached out and placed her cool, rough hand over Ellie's. "You're a kind girl. You see a person, not a nuisance on the sidewalk. You're not like most. You didn't grow bitter." Ellie suddenly found it hard to breathe. She wasn't used to warmth. Even kind words felt foreign, like a song from someone else's world. She swallowed. "I just couldn't walk past. You're a person. You shouldn't be left outside in the cold." For the first time, Margaret smiled. It was almost childlike, a little shy, a little embarrassed. She looked at Ellie as if recognizing something in her. "Do you believe that kindness comes back to you?" she asked. "I'm not sure," Ellie replied with a shrug. "Sometimes it feels like it doesn't. But if you don't believe in that, then what's the point?" Margaret nodded. Then she was quiet again, as if gathering her thoughts. "I don't have much. No home, no money, not much strength. But I do have something." She slowly got up, went to her worn-out bag, and pulled out a small envelope, sealed and with frayed corners. "This is a strange gift," she said with a smile. "And maybe at first you'll think it's useless. But if you ever find yourself at a dead end, open it. It might help you, in a very unusual way." "What is it?" Ellie asked, surprised, taking the envelope. "Just a set of numbers," Margaret said. "Only one person knew them. And now you're the second. Just promise you won't throw them away, even if they make no sense at first. Sometimes answers come later." A shiver ran down Ellie's spine. She didn't know why the old woman was giving her this envelope, but there was certainty in Margaret's voice. Like all of this had been meant to happen. Like someone had planned it from above. She closed her hand around the envelope and nodded. "I promise." Margaret sat back down, suddenly tired, as if she had just passed something very important on. "You helped me with no conditions," she whispered, "and I want to help you too. Just in a different way." The next morning, Ellie woke up early. Light filtered through the blinds, and the rain had finally stopped. A quiet stillness hung in the air, but the old woman was gone. Ellie sat up quickly, startled by the empty room. For a moment, she feared she had only dreamt the whole thing. But there, on the pillow beside her, lay a neatly folded handkerchief, and on the nightstand, the same mug with a bit of cold tea. Margaret had left, without waking her, without a goodbye, just vanished. On the table lay the envelope, white with yellowed edges. Ellie picked it up carefully, turning it over in her hands. There was something inside, not money, not photos, not keys. Something flat and stiff. She traced the edge of the sealed flap with her finger, then, after hesitating, opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded in half. On it, a row of numbers written in large, slightly shaky handwriting. 471N28, 95, 12. And beneath it, "Keep this. Remember, when you're ready, seek." Ellie frowned. No explanation, no address, no name. Just numbers. She stared at them for several minutes, as if hoping they would rearrange themselves into words or coordinates. But nothing. No associations. Just a mysterious, silent code. With a sigh, she dropped the paper back on the table and sat on the bed again. It felt like a joke. She had helped someone, genuinely from the heart, and received a riddle, a strange sequence of numbers. No thanks, no message, just something that felt pointless. But she couldn't bring herself to throw it away. Ellie folded the paper and placed it in her document folder, the one where she kept her birth certificate, orphanage records, and housing letter. Let it stay, just in case. The rest of the day passed in a blur. She went to the employment center, not expecting much, but trying anyway. She found a listing for a night shift at a 24-hour coffee shop. Low pay, long hours, but it was something. Then she visited the college to ask about application deadlines, lines, bureaucracy, cold clerks behind windows. By mid-afternoon, Ellie felt drained. On the way back to the dorm, she thought about Margaret. Where had she gone? Why had she left without a word? Maybe she was afraid, used to disappearing, used to having no one. Ellie felt a pang in her chest, not for herself, but for the fragile connection that had so suddenly broken. At home, she looked again at the envelope. Something about it wouldn't let her go. Maybe it was a bank account, coordinates, a password, or an archive number. A memory surfaced. In the orphanage, each child had a personal file. Each file had a number. Maybe that was what this was. The next morning, she gathered her courage and went to the building that used to be her orphanage. It had since become a child welfare office. Ellie approached the reception desk and tapped lightly on the glass. "Good morning. I'm Ellie Ray. I used to live at the Brook Street Orphanage. I'd like to request a copy of my old records." The woman behind the desk looked surprised. "Requests like that are usually processed in writing. Do you have a reason?" "I just need to check something," Ellie said, pulling out the slip of paper with the numbers. After a moment of hesitation, she slid it under the glass. The woman studied the numbers carefully, then raised an eyebrow. "This looks like an old-style archive code. They used formats like this in the 90s, but we've moved to digital now. I can try to search, but if it's not in the system, there's nothing I can do." Ellie nodded, heart pounding. The woman disappeared into the back. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Ellie began to lose hope, when finally, the woman returned. "Something did come up," she said quietly, "but access is restricted. You'll need special authorization. Are you sure this concerns you?" Ellie didn't hesitate. "Yes, I'm sure." The woman handed her a request form. "Fill this out. It could take time. But if you're right, there might be something important in there." Ellie stepped outside, clutching the form to her chest. Her heart raced. The numbers weren't nonsense. They meant something. And maybe, just maybe, Margaret had known that all along. Brian replied within a couple of hours. "Ellie? Wow. Of course I remember. You were in the younger group with me. How did you even find me?" Ellie smiled. Something clicked inside her, as if another missing piece of her past had fallen into place. "I was looking for someone named Brian Turner, an archivist. Saw your photo and recognized you. It sounds crazy, but I really need to talk. It's about my orphanage file." He responded immediately. "I do work in archives, yeah. This isn't a joke. You actually found an old case number?" "Yes. And I think it's connected to my mother. Can you help me? Come by tomorrow. I'll show you everything I can." The next morning, Ellie arrived at the Municipal Archive, a red brick building with a faded facade and a crooked sign. Inside, it smelled of dust, paper, and something else. Familiar. Like a ghost of childhood. The scent of offices, files, long-forgotten secrets. Brian met her in the lobby. He'd grown taller, broader in the shoulders, but his smile still had the same warm sincerity. "This is surreal," he said, giving her a quick hug. "Never thought we'd cross paths again. You look just the same." "And you don't have freckles anymore," Ellie teased. "Thanks for agreeing to help. I'm completely lost in this." They went up to the third floor to a quiet, locked wing. Brian punched in a code and led her into the restricted records room. He pulled up a computer and gestured for her to sit. "That number you gave me, it's real. It's in the system. But access is partially restricted. A lot of these kinds of records are sealed, especially those involving custody disputes or private legal matters. Some were hidden at the request of outside parties." He typed in the code 4711N289512E. A file appeared on screen. Ellie leaned in, name, birth date, case number. Everything matched. "This says the file was sealed by a third party. That's unusual. Usually files just get lost or misfiled. But this one, it's deliberately locked. Can you find out who requested the restriction? Ellie asked. Brian nodded and clicked into another window. Here, the requester's name, Peter Carter. Ellie flinched. Who is that? Let me check, Brian murmured, pulling up an old government registry. A minute later, he found it. Carter, Peter Jonathan, co-owner of a major medical clinic in the 90s. Now, the head of a private laboratory network. One of the top donors to a children's health foundation. He trailed off, scrolling further. Wait, this just got weirder. What? He's listed as the fiancé of a woman named Sarah Ray. That's your mom, right? Ellie's breath caught. I've never been told her name. But if she's Ray, and if she's tied to that file, Brian nodded slowly, then she was alive. Long enough for this man to file the restriction months after you were born. Why would he do that? Ellie rose to her feet, pacing. Maybe he wanted to cover something up. Maybe something happened to her, and he was involved. Maybe he didn't want me to find out. Brian didn't speak. Then he stood, went to a cabinet, and pulled out a folder labeled Special Permissions. I'm not technically allowed to show you this, but you're not a stranger, and you deserve to know. He handed her a copy of a statement, handwritten and signed by Sarah Ray. Ellie traced the lines with her finger, her throat tightening. If anything happens to me, I request that my daughter be placed in safe hands. Contact Margaret Linden. She knows what to do. Ellie sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. Her mother had known. She'd sensed the danger, and Margaret, she wasn't some stranger. She had been entrusted with the truth all this time. I need to find her, Ellie whispered. She disappeared that same night, but she knew. About the numbers, about my mother, about Carter. Brian sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. We'll find her. But first, let's gather everything we have. Every document, every name. I have access to some of the old medical databases. We might be able to track down where Sarah was taken and where she disappeared. Ellie nodded. For the first time, she had a purpose. Peter Carter had something to hide. Her mother had lived longer than she'd been told, and Margaret was the key to everything. Days blurred into one another as Ellie and Brian dug deeper into the past. They scoured records, made phone calls, traced addresses, and combed through medical files. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became. This wasn't just a case of lost documents. Someone had gone out of their way to erase the truth. One clue led them to a hospital record for a woman named Sarah Ray. According to the file, after giving birth, she had been transferred to a recovery facility, a private clinic called Riverside. But the paper trail ended there. No discharge records, no transfer, no death certificate. Just silence. This doesn't make sense, Brian muttered as he flipped through old forms. Records don't just disappear. Someone either destroyed them or buried them, professionally. So it was Carter, Ellie said grimly. He had ties to that clinic, didn't he? Still does. He funded it. It was the first in his chain. If he wanted something gone, he had the resources. Ellie stood at the window, arms crossed tightly across her chest. Why? Why go to such lengths? What happened to her? Brian hesitated. Ellie, what if he was your father? Ellie turned to him, stunned. You think he knew about me? That he hid me? If he was engaged to your mother and she left that note asking to protect you, she clearly didn't trust him. She might have refused to give you up, and he, being powerful, might have made her disappear to control the situation. Ellie sat down slowly, trying to process the possibility. Everything she thought she knew, that she had no family, no story, no one looking for her, was unraveling. Suddenly, Brian stood up, holding a printed sheet. I found something. It's a staff roster from Riverside in 2007. And look here, a nurse named Margaret Linden. She worked there the same month your mother was admitted. Ellie's eyes widened. She was there? Yes, that's probably how they met. Maybe Margaret became her confidant. Maybe she was the only one your mom could trust. He pointed at the page again. Then she quit, just 2 weeks later. No reason listed. Maybe she saw something, Ellie whispered, or they forced her out. Brian nodded. We need to find her. He spent the next 2 days tracking Margaret through welfare and hospital databases. Finally, he found her. Margaret Linden, recently admitted to Greenwood General Hospital for hypothermia. No ID, name recorded verbally, likely the same woman. Brian printed the form and handed it to Ellie. I think this is her. She's alive. Then we go. Greenwood Hospital was clean but worn down. Nurses were polite but cautious. At first, they denied Ellie access. But after she gently insisted, and with Brian showing his credentials, they agreed to escort them. Margaret lay in a small room by the window, tucked under a blanket. She looked frail, her face thinner, her skin almost translucent, but her eyes were still the same, quiet, deep, watchful. Ellie, she whispered when she saw her, you found me. Ellie rushed to her side, sitting gently on the bed, her eyes stung with tears. Why did you leave without a word? Why didn't you tell me sooner? Margaret gave a soft, tired smile. I was afraid I wouldn't live long enough. Afraid you'd turn away if I said too much too fast. But I knew, if I gave you just enough, you'd find the truth. You're like your mother. Brave. You knew her. You were with her? Margaret nodded. She was admitted to the clinic. Scared, alone. She told me about Carter, how he wanted her to give you up. When she refused, he threatened to her. She begged me, if anything happened, to protect you, to keep the truth alive. I couldn't stop what happened to her, but I could leave you the path. The numbers, Ellie whispered, the envelope. Margaret smiled. Her idea, an old archive number. She said you'd understand when the time came. Ellie took her hand. We're going to make this right. We're going to expose him. We've already started. You must, Margaret said softly. The world sees Carter as a hero. But you know better. Show them. I will, Ellie promised. For her, for you, for me. Margaret squeezed her hand gently. Then go. The truth is already waking up. Ellie couldn't sleep that night. She had returned home late, her head spinning with everything Margaret had told her. The truth had finally begun to take shape. Her mother had been alive, had feared for her child, and had trusted one woman, a woman who had protected that secret for nearly 2 decades. Now Ellie had the truth. Almost. She woke up early the next morning and packed a small bag of things for Margaret. Warm socks, a scarf, her favorite tea. She had promised herself she would take care of the woman who once took care of her, even from the shadows. But when she arrived at the hospital, something felt wrong. I'm here to visit Margaret Linden, she told the receptionist, holding the bag close to her chest. The woman tapped on her keyboard, then frowned. Sorry, there's no patient under that name. What? That's impossible, Ellie said. She was admitted days ago. I was just here. The woman double-checked, then gave a shrug. She was discharged yesterday, picked up by a relative. Ellie went cold. She doesn't have any relatives. The woman looked up. Ma'am, I just work here. The papers were in order. She was signed out and taken by someone. Can I see who signed her out? A name? The receptionist hesitated. I'm really not supposed to give out that information. Ellie leaned forward. If she's been taken against her will, if she's in danger, and you helped make that happen, you'll want it on record that you cooperated, trust me. The woman bit her lip, then scribbled something on a sticky note. This is the name that was listed, E. Courtney. Ellie stared at the note, heart racing. She didn't recognize the name, but she recognized the pattern. Something wasn't right. She stepped outside and called Brian. She's gone, she said as soon as he picked up. Someone took her. They signed her out under a false identity. Brian didn't hesitate. I'll check the name. Give me a few hours. Ellie wandered through the city, her thoughts spinning. It had to be Carter. He must have realized the truth was slipping from his control. And if Margaret had started talking, she shook her head. She couldn't let herself finish that thought. Later that afternoon, Brian called back. You were right, he said. The woman who signed her out, Ellen Courtney, used to work for Carter. She was a personal assistant at Riverside. Her name shows up in the staff registry the same year your mother was there. So he is behind this. I'm afraid so. He's moving fast. But I found something else. She may have been moved to a private care facility, one that Carter funds. It's off the books. but I got a location. Ellie didn't hesitate. Let's go. The care home was outside the city, a sleek building with security gates and a name that sounded more like a spa than a hospital. The Pines Retreat. The receptionist smiled professionally when they walked in. We're here to see Margaret Linden, Ellie said firmly. I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name, the receptionist replied smoothly. Ellie took a breath. She may be listed as Mary Linden or under another alias, but we know she's here. And if you don't let us see her, we will bring the press, the police, and everyone who's been following this case to your doorstep. The woman blinked. Brian quietly showed his official ID. I work with the Municipal Archive. We have authorization to verify patient identity. A tense pause. Then, the woman gave in. Wait here. 15 minutes later, they wheeled Margaret into the lobby in a chair. She looked pale but smiled when she saw Ellie. I knew you'd come, she whispered. Ellie ran to her and knelt down, taking her hand. I'm sorry it took me so long. I won't let them take you again. They took her back to the city that night, placing her under care in a regular public hospital, one with security, cameras, and no hidden hands pulling strings. That night, Ellie sat by her bed as Margaret slept. Brian brought her tea and sat beside her in silence. We're getting close, he finally said. Ellie nodded. He's scared. That's why he tried to hide her again. He's powerful, Brian warned. But now we have names, dates, paper trails. It's only a matter of time. I'm ready, Ellie said. No more running, no more waiting. She looked at Margaret, resting peacefully at last. This time, she whispered, we end it. From that day forward, Ellie made Peter Carter her mission. She devoured every article ever written about him, from glossy magazine interviews praising his philanthropy, to business profiles listing his impressive network of clinics and labs. The man was a public saint, funding hospitals, championing children's health, donating millions. But Ellie had seen what lay behind the polished image. Brian helped her build a digital map of Carter's connections, names, companies, properties, foundations. They created a timeline of events surrounding Sarah Ray's disappearance, overlaying it with Carter's business expansions. One thing became clear: every time something significant happened in Carter's career, someone around him quietly vanished. A nurse, a records clerk, even an investigator who once tried to reopen a forgotten case. This isn't just one cover-up, Brian said. It's a pattern. Every time the past threatened to rise, he buried it deeper. But not deep enough, Ellie replied. The biggest breakthrough came when Ellie contacted a former nurse from the Riverside Clinic. Using a pseudonym, she reached out pretending to be a university student working on a paper about medical ethics in private institutions. The nurse responded after a day. I remember that time. There was a woman, a patient, taken from the clinic late at night. No paperwork, no explanation. People whispered about it, but anyone who asked questions got reassigned or fired. I quit soon after. I still don't know what happened to her. Ellie stared at the message, heart pounding. It was her, she said aloud. That was my mom. Carter took her in the middle of the night? He did something to her. Brian nodded grimly. And we can prove he covered it up. They turned their focus to one of Carter's first clinics, Eastbridge Labs, officially shut down years ago due to licensing issues. But Brian found that the property still belonged to a holding company Carter controlled, and no one had entered it in over a decade. We should go, Ellie said. If he buried something, it might still be there. The old lab was surrounded by chain-link fencing and overgrown weeds. They climbed through a hole in the fence and crossed the cracked pavement. The building loomed before them, forgotten by time. Inside, it smelled of mold and paper. Dust floated in the shafts of sunlight, piercing through broken blinds. Desks had been left behind, cabinets half open, filing drawers filled with folders. They found the archive room in the basement. The lock was broken. Ellie shone her flashlight across the dusty boxes. Years labeled in marker. 2006. 2028. She pulled one out. Brian, she whispered. This one's marked with my mother's name. He hurried over as she opened the file. Inside, medical records, lab reports, internal memos. And near the bottom, A letter written by Sarah. If something happens to me, I want it on record. Peter Carter threatened me. He demanded I give up my child. I refused. I fear for my safety. Below that, a psychological evaluation stating she was mentally stable, coherent, and capable of raising her child. This is enough, Brian said, stunned. He can't cover this anymore. Ellie gently closed the file, hands shaking. This ends now. They scanned every page, took photographs, made copies, and sent everything to a journalist Brian trusted. 3 days later, the story broke. Prominent philanthropist accused of cover-up and patient disappearance. Daughter of missing woman speaks out. My mother deserves justice. Secret archives uncovered in abandoned clinic. The Carter files. Carter went silent. He didn't appear at press conferences. He didn't respond to interview requests. Then came the announcement. He was stepping down as chairman of the Health for Children Foundation, citing personal reasons. Ellie sat in front of her laptop, watching the news scroll by. Her name, her mother's name. Headlines that once felt like fantasy were now fact. He's cornered, Brian said beside her. It's only a matter of time before the police get involved. Ellie nodded. I want to see him. Ellie, I have to. She waited outside one of Carter's clinics the next morning. It was cold, but her hands didn't shake. When he finally exited the building, dressed immaculately in a tailored coat, he didn't notice her at first. Then their eyes met. He stopped the mid-step. Miss Ray, he said after a long pause, congratulations. You've made quite the name for yourself. This isn't about fame, Ellie replied. This is about the truth, the one you tried to erase. You've stirred up quite the mess. But I assure you, you don't know everything. I know enough. I know my mother was alive. I know she refused to give me up. I know you made her disappear. He smiled faintly, cold and tight. You're playing with fire. This world doesn't run on emotion, Miss Ray. It runs on power. Ellie stepped forward. Then I'll burn everything down if I have to. He studied her for a moment, then turned away without another word. She watched him go, heart pounding but steady. We're not finished, she whispered. Not yet. The media storm continued for days. Headlines raged, interviews aired, and public opinion turned against Peter Carter with startling speed. He remained silent, but his empire began to crack. Sponsors withdrew, clients canceled, and his once spotless reputation lay in ruins. But Ellie didn't care about any of that. She cared about Margaret. The day after their confrontation, Ellie returned to the hospital to visit her. She brought her favorite tea, a warm shawl, and a framed copy of the photo they'd found, of Sarah Ray holding baby Ellie in her arms. But when she reached the reception desk and gave Margaret's name, the nurse frowned. She's not here anymore, she said. What do you mean? Ellie's stomach dropped. She was transferred, signed out this morning. By who? The nurse hesitated, sensing Ellie's alarm. It just says relative. We assumed it was arranged. She has no relatives. Who signed her out? I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to. Ellie's voice shook. If you don't tell me, I'll be back with the press and a lawyer. You've heard the name Peter Carter. Do you want to be part of the next headline? That did it. The nurse handed her a printout. Ellie scanned it. The signature? E. Courtney. Again. Carter's loyal assistant. Again. She turned and ran from the building. Margaret had vanished. Again. Ellie called Brian immediately. He was already working on it. I have someone tracking Carter's properties, he told her. One of them, a private convalescent facility outside the city, just filed a patient intake form for someone named Mary Linton. Fake name, but the timing fits. I'm going there, Ellie said. I'm coming with you. The facility was upscale and clinical, nestled in pine trees and surrounded by high walls. The receptionist greeted them with a rehearsed smile, the kind that hides secrets. We're here to see Margaret Linden, Ellie said calmly. I'm sorry, but we don't have anyone by that name. Ellie leaned forward. She may be registered under a false name. We know she was transferred here. You can either cooperate now, or you can explain yourself when the police arrive with a court order. The woman froze, and then without a word, she got up and disappeared down the hall. 10 minutes later, they brought Margaret out in a wheelchair. She looked tired but alive. And when she saw Ellie, her face lit up. I knew you'd come, she whispered. Ellie rushed to her side. I'm so sorry, she said. I should have stayed closer. I should have. No, Margaret said, voice weak but steady. You did everything right. They brought her back to the city and placed her in a secure public hospital, this time with real oversight. And that night, they prepared for the final step. The next morning, Ellie stood in front of cameras, not as a victim, but as a voice. She gave a quiet, honest interview on national television. Not about revenge, not about scandal, but about truth. My name is Ellie Ray, she began. I was raised in an orphanage. I was told my mother died giving birth to me. But that wasn't true. She lived. She tried to protect me. And someone made her disappear. She took a breath. Her name was Sarah Ray. She was strong. She was brave. And she was silenced by a man who thought no one would look for her. But someone did. She showed them the photo. She spoke of the numbers, of the old envelope, of Margaret. She was the one who remembered me, who carried my mother's voice when no one else did. She was forgotten, but she remembered me. The silence in the studio was absolute. That night, the story spread like wildfire. And the next day, the police issued a warrant for Peter Carter. Ellie stood outside the hospital at dusk. Brian joined her, holding 2 hot drinks. They watched the city lights begin to flicker on. You did it, he said. No, she replied. We did. They sat together on the bench, sipping quietly. Margaret was resting, peacefully for once. Safe. I want to study social work, Ellie said suddenly. Help kids like me. Help people like her. Brian smiled. I think you already started. Ellie looked at the night sky. She said kindness always comes back. He nodded. She was right. 3 months passed. Winter faded into spring and the world slowly softened. But the biggest change wasn't in the weather. It was in Ellie. She was no longer the quiet girl who'd left the orphanage with a bag of noodles and no plan. She was no longer just a name on a forgotten file. Now she had a story, and the voice to tell it. Peter Carter had been arrested. The case moved quickly. Between Margaret's testimony, the recovered documents, and public pressure, the prosecution built a damning case. Carter's image as a savior collapsed, and behind it emerged the truth of manipulation, abuse of power, and the life he had stolen from Ellie and her mother. Ellie didn't attend every hearing. She didn't need to. The point had never been vengeance. It had been truth. And now, the world knew. She had also been accepted to college. With a full scholarship offered by a foundation moved by her story, she enrolled in the social work program. Her goal was clear: help children without families, seniors without voices, and anyone who might otherwise fall through the cracks. Margaret now lived in a cozy senior home not far from the college. Her room had windows that overlooked a garden, and Ellie visited every week, sometimes with books, sometimes with soup, and always with time. The nurses called her Margaret's granddaughter. She's not my granddaughter, Margaret would say with a soft smile. She's something more. She's what came back to me. One afternoon, Ellie found a photograph tucked into one of the recovered files. It showed a young woman with tired eyes and a tender smile, holding a newborn wrapped in a hospital blanket. Her mother. Ellie stared at the image for a long time. It felt like looking in a mirror and through a window at the same time. A stranger and yet the most familiar person in the world. I found you, she whispered. Too late, but I found you. She framed the photo and placed it on her desk. A portrait of love, brief but real. That spring, she walked past the same apartment building where she had once seen Margaret for the first time, huddled by the radiator, nearly invisible. She stopped. The spot was just as she remembered it. Cold tile, dim light, silence. She hadn't just offered Margaret a cup of tea that night. She had accepted a piece of her own destiny, a kindness by chance, and it had changed everything. In college, she volunteered for a crisis line. Sometimes she answered calls from teenagers who didn't know where to go, sometimes from elderly people who simply needed to be heard. She listened, spoke gently, without judgment, just as she had once longed for someone to do for her. One day, she wrote in her notebook, "There are no meaningless encounters, no wasted kindness. Everything you give to the world returns to you, sometimes as the truth you've waited for your whole life. She kept those words taped to her mirror. On Margaret's birthday, they held a small celebration in the home's common room. There was music, cake, and soft laughter. Ellie gave her a new shawl, woven with violets and gold threads, and a notebook with a golden ribbon. "For your stories," she said. Margaret smiled as she took the gift. "I've already told the ones that mattered," she said. "The rest, that's your story now." That night, after everyone had gone, Ellie stayed behind a little longer. She sat by Margaret's bedside and looked out the window. The sky was soft with twilight. A breeze stirred the curtains. Peace, gentle, hard-won peace, filled the room. "You gave me the truth," Ellie whispered, "and you gave me family." She kissed Margaret's forehead and stood. "Now I'll give it to others." Margaret opened her eyes just long enough to smile. "And you already are." Ellie stepped out into the hallway, took a deep breath, and walked forward. The past had finally led her home.